It's time for another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina, featuring industry outlooks, panel discussions on trending topics, and interviews with business executives, community leaders, and government officials. And now, coming to you from the Drum Creative Studio, here's your host, longtime South Carolina business publisher, Rick Jenkins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina. As always, I am your host, Rick Jenkins. We're coming to you from the Drum Creative Studios, and if you are keeping score, we are at episode number 46. It is that time of year again. It is the very beginning of tax season. It's a headache for a lot of us, right? I know I'm already beginning to think about it. But what we're going to do today is we're going to have our expert here talk to us a little bit about what's new on the horizon from our friends at the IRS and just give us some good old advice. This is John Price. John is a managing member for tax and advisory services at Scott & Company. Scott & Company is headquartered over in Columbia. They are an accounting, tax, and consulting firm. John, welcome.
Thank you, Rick. Good to see you again.
It is good to have you here. So you drove over from Columbia, all good?
Yep, no problems.
Good. All right, so let's get to it. Busy time of the year for you. For the next 4 months, you're going to be crazy busy, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. As I mentioned, I want to bring our viewers and our listeners up to speed on any new changes that have surfaced from a tax perspective this year. And so I did a little research myself, and what I want to do is just kind of tee you up a little bit,
Right.
talk about some different topics, and you can share the details.
Absolutely.
Let's start with and you told me this before we came on air, but that the IRS makes inflationary changes every year to the brackets, the earning brackets.
Right.
And so I just want to run through that a little bit. Tax and inflation adjustments we're talking about. How have the earning brackets changed this year compared to last, and is it significant?
Every year they increase where the bracket ends.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the inflation adjustment for 25 is not nearly as much as it was for the year before, but thankfully, from the standpoint of all of us having to pay for everything. But as many people may or may not know, there are 7 different tax brackets.
Yep, I did.
From going from 10%, which is the lowest bracket, up to 37%, which is at the highest bracket. And then for a married filing joint return, you got to have taxable income of over $750,000 to get to the 37% bracket. And it just kind of gradually goes down. The brackets increase in size as far as what falls in between them.
Right.
But it goes from 37 to 35 to 32, 24, 22, 12, and 10.
Wow.
So there's a lot of room to play there.
I'm just curious, if you are a single filer,
Yep.
What does that top bracket start at?
It starts at it's half. So when several years ago there were differences between single and married filing joint, and they kind of leveled that out. So whatever the married filing joint is, you can divide that by 2, and that's your single.
So we're talking 325,000.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. There are also changes to the retirement plan contributions.
Right.
Explain how that works.
So there's obviously different retirement type of plans. So a lot of people these days who are working for companies are in 401k plans.
Yes.
So for 2025, you can max out, if you want to do your max 401k, that's $23,500. Now, if you're 50 to 59 or over 63, then you are allowed to make what they call a catch-up contribution. And that number is $7,500. So if you're in that range, you could potentially put away $31,000 into your 401k plan for that year. Now you understand that I didn't say 50 and older.
Yes.
So this year, starting in 25, there is an additional catch-up contribution for those people who will be 60 to 63 at the end of the year. So if you fall in that 4-year range for 25, you would then be able to put another $3,750 into your 401k. So now you're looking at almost $35,000 that you could put into your 401k if you're going to be 60 to 63 at the end of this year.
Got it.
If your employer provides a simple plan, the contributions aren't nearly as much, but you can still put in maximum of 16.5. Again, you can do a catch up if you're in those time and age ranges of 3,500 with an additional 1,750 if you're in that 60 to 63 range. And then there's also the traditional IRA account, which, and for 25, you can put in $7,000. And if you're 50 and older, you can put in another 1,000. That 60 to 63 does not apply to individual retirement accounts. It's just for simples and 401ks. So not for your IRAs.
So a couple thoughts, folks. One, that was a whole lot of numbers. And so thankfully this video, you can pause, go back and watch again. A second thought is there's some place that folks can go, maybe at a Scott and Company website page, where they can see the details you just talked about.
Yeah, so they can go to our website, or it's easy enough to go to the IRS website and you just type in retirement plan contributions in the search, and you should be able to find that information.
I want to stick there just for a second now and talk about business owners, small business owners, which I am one, of course. What options would someone like me have to contribute to a 401k within, a very small business?
Right. Well, so there is what they call a solo 401k plan, where you're just talking about, the business owner is the only one that's, quote, working for the company.
Right.
So they have those plans available.
Okay.
And so you could contribute through a solo 401k plan to get those higher limits.
Right.
So that you can maximize your tax savings today.
Yeah, got it. One thing that my wife and I both take advantage of every year is the HSA account. And I believe that those limits have increased a little bit.
That's right. So first of all, to make sure everybody's aware, you have to have a high deductible health insurance plan in order to be able to make contributions to a health savings account. So for 25, if you have an individual plan, you can put in, I believe it's $4,300. If you're a family plan, you can do up to $8,550 with another $1,000 that you can put in as a catch up. Now that range starts at 55, not 50 like the retirement plans.
Let's go move on to small businesses now. And I mentioned it here just a second ago, but let's stick there for a bit. When Donald Trump, in his initial term as president, when he was there, he implemented some tax cuts for small businesses that actually spurred small business growth for quite some time. Those tax cuts are getting ready to expire. And if nothing is done, of course, then that is going to have quite the impact on small business owners. However, I do believe that they will fix that situation and they won't expire. But what can you tell me about it?
Well, so for those that are not sure or aware of what you're referring to, if you have an active trader business and you are either operating as a sole proprietorship or an S corporation or a partnership, it's called we call it by the code section 199 cap A deduction, where you can take essentially whatever that net income is that's going to be on your personal tax return. Then if you meet certain things, then you can get a 20% deduction against that income. So basically, you're only going to pay tax on 80% of that income, which obviously effectively reduces your tax rate. So even at the highest rate of 37%, if you are eligible for this deduction, you're only paying tax net of just over 29%. I don't really believe that that's going to go away. I think just from what we've heard, they're going to try to make as much of what is currently in the law, keep it around. There may be some tweaks. There's all kind of stuff going on as far as will they reduce the number of rates, and but my gut feeling is telling me I don't necessarily know that they're going to change the rates as much as just kind of lock down what we have today and make sure it doesn't go away.
Right. Yeah, and from what I'm read that it will be saved, but let's just say that it is not. What is the end result if it is not?
Well, if it's not, then
Where's it going to go back to?
it's
from where
going
it
well.
was?
Like for instance, the top bracket was 39.6. Well, that would come back. There would be other things that that 20% deduction would disappear. So a lot of people would end up paying some more tax. I don't know how much, but they end up paying some more tax
Right.
because of that. And the other thing that hasn't really been talked about much is bonus depreciation. So a lot of people up until a couple of years ago would be able to buy a piece of personal property and just immediately expense it. It would just be 100% written off. Well, that 100% has been dropped the last couple of years, so that in 24, I believe it was only 60%, and it's due to go down again this year. I think one of the things that they're talking about is bringing that 100% back, which is always a good thing for small businesses, because there's always a need, especially a growing business is going to need more equipment, all those type of things.
That's right. Let's talk about vehicles as it relates to someone in a very small business reporting that vehicle and how is the best way to do it. And let's just start out with something really simple. The mileage rate has gone up again. I
Right.
believe
It's
penny
now-
and a half or something.
About 3 cents.
3
So now it's so this year in 25, it's 70 cents a mile. So if you drive your, a personal vehicle for business and you document, your mileage, then you can take that number of miles times 70 cents, and that's your deduction for the car or the truck or whatever you're driving. That's what we call the standard mileage rate. If you wanted to use actual, and you were like, I'm buying a vehicle this year and I'm going to depreciate it and I'm going to keep up with every gas invoice, insurance, oil change, all these things, you're going to keep up with all that, then that's great. But you still kind of have to keep up with the mileage, even though you're not using the mileage rate, because if you're not using it 100% for business, then some portion of those expenses you can't deduct because that's deemed to be personal.
Right.
So you still have to kind of keep up with it.
Am I right, though, that you can still deduct it? It's just that you deduct a percent of it based on how much you drive
Yes,
personal
yeah.
and how much you drive
Right.
for work, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, again, to clarify, you can either take a penny and a half a mile.
Well, it's going to be 70 cents.
I meant 70 cents. You can either a penny and a half. You can either take 70 cents a mile, or you can do it the other way.
Which is the actual method. So you're keeping up with every
Right.
expense that you incur for that vehicle.
So the 70 cents a mile not only includes gas, of course, obviously, but it includes oil changes.
It includes everything.
Anything
That's
spent
kind
on
of
the
built.
car. Right. So how do you make the decision? I guess if you got a new car or an old car, that's one thing to.
Right. And so and the thing about it is if you place not necessarily has to be new, but just a different vehicle into service. In other words, you're going to start driving this vehicle for business. You have to decide right then in that particular tax year, okay, I'm either going to take actual or I'm going to do standard mileage, because you can't take the actual and say, oh, I'm going to write all this off this year and then flip over to standard. It doesn't work that way. You have to do one or the other. And then you're stuck with that method for that particular vehicle until you retire it.
Right. Now, if you buy a new car that you're going to be used 100% business service, or whatever that percent is, you can deduct the depreciation on that in the first year, but it's not 100% of the depreciation,
and
right?
again, it depends on the type of vehicle. So if it's a car, you're probably going to be limited to somewhere around $18,000 in the first year. And then every year after that, it just goes down and it takes, cars aren't cheap anymore.
Right.
So if you spend $50,000 on a car, which is not hard to do in these days,
That's right.
it's going to take you a while to fully, it'll probably be, you would never depreciate it before you probably are turning it in or trading it in for something else.
Right.
If it's a large SUV or a big truck, then there's a higher write-off that you can get. But clients ask me all the time, well, what should I do? I'm like, well, how good are you keeping records?
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
they're like, I'm like, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So they just rather just do the standard mileage. It's easier than having to keep up with all those receipts.
John, any advice for small business owners? Maybe not so much someone who has been running their small business for a while, but maybe they're thinking about it.
Right.
And they just need to kind of have an understanding of all the stuff because they don't know what they don't know.
Correct.
I was there.
Yeah.
Advice for those kind of folks.
I would say that make sure you concentrate your efforts on what you do well, and then let the hire professionals or seek guidance from other things that you're not familiar with, or you're just like, oh, that's not something I do well. Like for instance, if you have somebody who is a great salesman, and that is what he or she does, then they need to spend their time concentrating on sales. They don't need to be worrying about keeping up with the payroll or the expenses or marketing, marketing the name or whatever. Spend your time on, and then have people from the outside help you with those other things.
Right.
You'll be more likely to succeed if you spend the majority of your time on what you do well or you are passionate about.
Got it. That is really good advice. Folks, that is John Price. John works for Scott and Company. They are an accounting, tax, and consulting firm headquartered over in Columbia. And that was some good tax advice, folks. We appreciate you joining us. Come back and see us again for another episode of Let's Talk Business South Carolina.